Good afternoon. We are going to get started. Thank you so much for joining us. Apologies for the 6 minutes that we've stolen from our start time, but we really appreciate all of you being on time so we can start our proceedings on time. I'm Deborah Meyer. I'm the Deputy Vice Chancellor, Research, Innovation, and Postgraduate Studies, and I'll be the Program Director for our events today. We have a program. I think it was on the seats for some individuals, but we will tell you what the next step of the proceeding is every step that we go. I want to ask, if you haven't thought of it yet, please, if you can take a look now at your cell phone and put the sound off or put it on airplane mode, anything that will prevent interruption of our proceedings today. I also want to indicate for individuals who may be new to Sol Plaatje University, if you're going to need the facilities, all you have to do is go out to the side and walk to the back on either side, and you will find the restrooms there. It is not my job to welcome you. I am just opening our event today. Our Vice Chancellor and Principal will come up to welcome you officially. I do want to acknowledge all our invited guests, and I am unsure whether they have turned up as yet, but I'm going to acknowledge them all the same. So I would first like to acknowledge Justice Albie Sachs, our honored guest and guest speaker, Justice Majid, the Chancellor of our institution, who is there. Our Chairperson of Council, Judge Mamateba Patswane. We also invited our Premier, Dr. Zamani Sol, Dr. Mani Dipicho, Executive Deputy Chairman of De Beers, members of the family of Sol Plaatje and the Sol Plaatje Trust, Judge Tlaletsi, the Judge President of the Northern Cape, Judge Nkladala, Regional Court President, Mr. Kriling, Chief Magistrate, Mr. Livingston Sakata, Office of the Public Protector, other members of SPU Council, members of the Northern Cape Provincial Government, Executive Council and heads of department. A special welcome also to our Vice Chancellor and Principal, Professor Crouch, who is over there. Other members of SPU Senior Management Team, members of the SPU Management Forum, SPU students and staff. And we also want to acknowledge our alumni who are back on campus this weekend. We are excited to bring them back for the inaugural alumni homecoming this weekend, where we will give them an opportunity to witness the growth of our institution. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you may or may not be aware, we started with 124 students in 2014. We are now just under 6,000. So we want to expose our alumni to that. Then, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for making yourselves available and joining us for this auspicious occasion. This lecture kicks off our activities for the Sol Plaatje Memorial Weekend that will be happening starting today all the way on to Saturday evening. It is now my privilege and pleasure to welcome Professor Andrew Crouch, the Vice Chancellor and Principal, for an official welcome.
Thank you, Prof. Meyer, for that kind introduction. I would like to start by welcoming everyone to Sol Plaatje University. A special word of welcome to our guest speaker, Justice Albie Sachs. And we earlier, before this lecture or proceeding started, we met upstairs on the 6th floor, and Judge Sachs said that he has some link to Kimberley. He kept it a secret. He said to me that I must listen very carefully, so Judge, I will definitely be very, very attentively. But we know from the CV of Justice Sachs that he's a person of great stature, great intellect, humble person. But he's also a person that has sacrificed so much for this country. And hopefully he can share some thoughts with us later on during his talk here on his reflections. And I like the title, Is This the Country I Was Fighting For? Is this the country that so many people have sacrificed for? And I'd like to hear your reflections on that. We are honored to have you as our guest speaker, and thank you very, very much for gracing us with your presence. I'd also like to recognize the program director, Professor Meyer. She has already introduced herself. Our Chancellor, Justice Stephen Majid, and his wife, who's sitting over there in the audience. Our Chair of Council, see she has to probably be on her way. Our Deputy Chair of Council, Mr. Malusi, if he's present. Our Premier of the Northern Cape, Dr. Sol, Dr. Mani De Picho, Executive Deputy Chairman of the BS, and I should add a good friend of Sol Plaatje University. Members of the Sol Plaatje Family Trust, that's here present. We are very well protected today because we have a lot of justices and lots of judges here. So I'm going to recognize the Judge President of the Northern Cape and judges of the High Court without mentioning individual names, because I think those have already been mentioned. I also like to extend a hearty welcome to members of our University Council that's present here today, members of the Northern Cape Provincial Government Executive Council and the Head of Department, members of the Sol Plaatje University Senior Management, as well as the Management Forum of Sol Plaatje University. Our SPU students, both those present physically and those that are logged in virtually. And I'll talk tonight about the fact that all our events at this institution are in fact screened online. So we are very, very much up to date in terms of the technology. And then also our alumni. They are having an alumni homecoming weekend, and I'm hoping also to talk to them during the course of this weekend in terms of the role they can play in this institution, in taking the institution to greater heights. Because it's important that their role as ambassadors for Sol Plaatje University is both recognized but also encouraged. So welcome back, alumni, to the campus. It's a different campus from the one you left behind. It has transformed in so many, many ways, both physically and mentally, as well as intellectually. I'd also like to welcome those members of the audience who are online, staff and students. From the comfort of your home, you are watching these proceedings, and all other guests in this auditorium who I think I have not recognized yet. Ladies and gentlemen, next week, Wednesday, will be the birthday of Solomon Plaatje, who was born on the 9th of October in 1876. As is the tradition at this university, we observe the birthday of the man for whom we are named after the university, and we are hosting this annual Sol Plaatje Lecture series or weekend to honor his name. Now, there are different ways in which one can honor people. I always say that the best way to honor someone is to make sure that they are always remembered. They're always remembered, not necessarily in the physical spaces they occupied, or the name plaque on a building or some physical space, but we honor them in the memories that we cherish for the good they have done and the contributions they have made. And it is in this spirit that we are hosting this weekend to celebrate and honor the namesake Sol Plaatje. But at the same time, we are also honoring not only the contribution he has made, but we're honoring this university and the contribution it has made thus far to not only Kimberley and the Northern Cape, but to the broader South Africa. And I think that is in the spirit of Sol Plaatje, the person, the contribution he has made and which we are now recognizing. There is a write-up, in the interest of time, there is a write-up of the history of Solomon Plaatje. So I'm not going to read everything verbatim, other than to say that we know that through his efforts, not only here, but in the broader South Africa, he has made an indelible mark on history. And it is through his efforts and others like himself, including Justice Sachs, that we are today enjoying the kind of freedom that we are having here. I'm constantly reminded when I drive across the Northern Cape of how far we have come as a country, but also still how far we must still go. And I think looking back is a template for sometimes what we should not do. There are some things that are good, but things that we should not do, and learn from those things so that we can project a positive future for ourselves, not only through the names and the memories and the heritage we leave behind. So with those few words, I'd like to invite our Chancellor, Justice Stephen Majid, to introduce Judge Albie Sachs. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Director of Ceremonies and all esteemed guests, all protocols observed, and a particular welcome and hello to Justice Albie Sachs, our guest speaker today. Now, I only have 15 minutes for this introduction, so I'd better use my time wisely. But apart from our special guest, Justice Sachs, I'd like to acknowledge the presence here today of a former Premier Mane de Picho. I always say he's the only man I actually worked under because I was an advocate and then a judge. But when I was here, I was chief legal advisor in his office. And we've become very good friends. I regard him as my brother. And he is indeed, Professor Crouch, a very good friend of the university. And very welcome here, you and Mrs. De Picho. Thank you very much. May I also recognize the presence here of my brother in the law, Judge President Laletsi, and several of his colleagues at the High Court bench here. Also, Chief Magistrate Oswald Krilling, and several magistrates here. And I'm very pleased that the bench is well represented here today. Really appreciate your presence. Thank you. I must say at the outset, I'm going to do two things. The one is, I think, as far as etiquette is concerned, acceptable. The other may not be, but I feel I should do it. But the first one is, we are really indebted to Justice Sachs for being here, because he had a bereavement with his in-laws, with his wife Vanessa's brother passed away, and he is being laid to rest tomorrow. So really, Justice Sachs should be there, and yet he is here. We really appreciate that. Thank you very, very much. And then the second thing that I'll be doing is to thank Ashlyn Kenny for the way she's been looking after Justice Sachs and just assisting me. Really appreciate it, Ashlyn. I know there's going to be thank yous afterwards and even this evening, but I'd really say from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Now, all of us know him as Albie, but his full names are Albert Louis Sachs. And his biography is there, the shorter version in the advert and the longer version in the booklet. But there's far more to him than just that. It'll take a long time to tell you everything about him. I'm going to try and do my best. One of the most apt descriptions I've ever seen of Justice Sachs is the following, and I quote: "A poetic, caring judge with the softest of hearts who infuses law and constitutionalism with sheer humaneness." Close quote. I can't think of a better description than that. When you access Wikipedia, you'll see far more about the multifaceted life of this extraordinary man that's gracing us with his presence in arid, dry, but much beloved for me, and I'm sure for all of us, Northern Cape, Kimberley. One of the many, if you look at Wikipedia, you'll see how many accolades and awards have been bestowed on him. Many honorary degrees. But you'll also see that one of the many awards he's received is the prestigious Lincoln Medal in the US, and that ceremony in 2010 was presided over by former President Obama. I want to say from a personal viewpoint, if we were asked today to compile a list of greatest South Africans, both alive now and who had passed on to higher calling, Justice Sachs would be very high up on my list. He's one of the greatest South Africans, I think, that's ever lived and is still living. And I mean that most sincerely. So today in this introduction, I'll speak outside of the parameters of what you have in the booklet there, a little bit about his formidable prowess as a Constitutional Court Justice. But I want to talk about another impressive accolade which not many people know about. George Clooney is a famous actor, and his wife Amal is a famous international human rights lawyer. And she clerked with one of the justices of the court, former justices of the court. And the two of them have established the Clooney Foundation. And that foundation strives to honor people who have made their mark around the world in the field of human rights. And in 2022, they established the foundation and they conferred a Lifetime Achievement Pursuit of Justice Award on Justice Sachs. And as I say, they honor people who tirelessly fight for justice. Now, those awards are named after Justice Sachs. They are called the Albies. So you have the Emmys and the Oscars and the Albies. At that occasion, on 2022, former First Lady Michelle Obama had this to say about Justice Sachs. She said, and I quote, "He helped to transform his own country, and in so doing, he challenged us to transform our own." That's what we honor tonight, not just the single man's legacy of progress, but the possibility of progress that's yet to be written, possibly that lies inside all of us, close quote. Now, I'm very grateful that there are so many younger generation people in the audience tonight, because you're the future of our country. And if you do nothing else, if you take nothing else away from tonight, is to listen closely to Albie Sachs, talk about our country, look at his history, and if you can, read some of his books. They're all listed either in Wikipedia or in the booklet. But my favorite one is The Soft Vengeance of a Freedom Fighter, and I'll talk about it later. And so let me say that our Constitutional Court is held in very high regard all over the world. I saw that firsthand this year in Ottawa, Canada, in July. They hosted the biennial public law conference, which held around the Commonwealth countries every second year. And there and again in Dublin in Ireland, where I also attended in July 2022, people waxed lyrical about the court and the work it does. And that is in no small measure due to what that first cohort of Constitutional Court justices that President Mandela had appointed what they had done. They established solid jurisprudence which is held in high admiration all around the world. And the Irish event in 2022 was especially significant because Ireland's constitution turned 100 years in 2022. And their Chief Justice was there. And he was one of those who spoke about the solid jurisprudence that that court has established for all of us. And of course, Canada's fundamental Charter of Rights is basically what gave rise, mostly, in large part, to our Bill of Rights. So there's a special connection there. And if you read the cases from our court, but from all courts, especially that deals with constitutional issues, you'll see us cite a lot of Canadian cases, but also they cite a lot of our cases. Sorry, can you pass me that? And we were paid a visit by their Chief Justice earlier this year and a few of his justices. And one of the things they said when they came to our court, because Justice Zondo, the former Chief Justice, invited them, is how much we are similar in our constitutionalism and our jurisprudence, but how different their court is to ours, because our court doesn't look like a court. It's a wonderful, open, welcoming space, and it doesn't look like this old colonial sandstone edifices with pillars and so on and so on. And I mentioned that because Justice Sachs was instrumental in the input for the architects of what the building should look like, to blend in with Constitutional Hill Precinct, because that whole precinct has just been declared a heritage site, and that's the place where, amongst many others, there were prisons there, the Old Fort Prison, the Women's Prison, and among many others, the luminaries who were confined there awaiting trial include Nelson Mandela and Mahatma Gandhi. So it is a really special place. Now, when I asked my law clerks at the court to do some research for me into Justice Sachs's judgments, here's the interesting thing. Now, remember, the Constitution says that those justices who weren't judges when they were appointed, and I'm one of those, so we've got a maximum of 12 years to stay on that court, but those who were not judges must stay 15 years. So Justice Sachs could not stay longer than 15 years. And he told me it was really sad when he had to leave. But my clerks told me something I didn't know, that for that first 15 years, the one judge who dissented, in other words, he wrote different opinions from the majority, was Justice Sachs. Now, you may say that's a bad thing, he's a serial dissenter. Well, let me tell you that many of those dissents have now become the law. And that's the thing of a dissent. Today's dissent or minority judgment becomes tomorrow's law. And when you read those judgments, they speak of independent thinking, obviously, because he just doesn't refuse to go with the majority just because they're the majority. But they bear testimony to remarkable insight, careful reasoning, but most of all, the deep humaneness of Justice Sachs. So let me quickly tell you about a few cases. Pretoria City Council versus Walker is an interesting case. It was decided in 1998 because there, what had happened, as in all our cities and towns, the old black townships and towns had to be amalgamated with a white town, so Pretoria, Mamelodi, Atteridgeville, Toshinguve, and so on. And then the city council levied different charges for water and electricity in former only white area and former only black areas. Justice Sachs concurred, and that was challenged by some of the white ratepayers, led by Mr. Walker. That was challenged on the basis that this is unfair discrimination. Now, Justice Sachs concurred with the majority on most points, but the one I want to highlight is that he dissented regarding the finding of unfair discrimination in this selective enforcement of debt recovery for services. And his argument in that dissenting opinion was that council's differentiated approach was justified. It was fair discrimination, in other words, because it's part of a process aimed at overcoming the historical and practical challenges that had entrenched disadvantages in the townships. And then there was Jordan versus the state, decided in 2002. This case concerned the constitutionality of sections of the Sexual Offences Act of 1957 that criminalized prostitution. Now, the court unanimously upheld the constitutionality of the brothel provisions, in other words, provisions that are related to the keeping of a brothel, but was split very narrowly 6-5 with respect to the criminalizing of the sex workers for prostitution, with the majority finding the provisions to be constitutional. In other words, if you do sex work, it was a criminal offense. And Justice Sachs was one of the 5 in the minority, very narrow, 6-5. And he, together with Kate O'Regan, Pius Langa, who was then Deputy Chief Justice, Laurie Ackerman, who has recently passed away, and Richard Goldstone found that that section brings about indirect unfair discrimination. And this is what he said, and he wrote. They wrote together, he and Kate. Quote, "We see no reason," and this is so striking, listen to this. Just think about the gender inequalities in our society, the patriarchal paradigm and mindset of our societies. They write, "We see no reason why the plier of sex for money should be treated as more blameworthy than the client. It must be so. If anything, the fact that the male customers will generally come from a class that is more economically powerful might suggest the reverse. To suggest that women may be targeted for prosecution because they are merchants of sex and not patrons is to turn the real life sociological situation upside down. It must be right." This is a minority speaking, mind you. "The evidence suggests that many women turn to prostitution because of dire financial need and that they use their earnings to support their families and pay for their children's food and education. As we have stated, we do not regard this as an excuse or a justification. However, to suggest that male patrons who are able to use their economic means to obtain sexual gratification are somehow the less blameworthy partners in the eyes of the criminal law appears to us to be markedly unfair." Close quote. And that is the point. You treat the male customer and the female sex worker completely differently. Why? And then there's Prince. Now, Prince was the gentleman who was an attorney who came to court. He said we must legalize cannabis. Now, in the first case in 2002, he didn't succeed. He succeeded later. And many people say, how could you legalize dacha, man? We've got problems, man. But you got to read the judgment very carefully. It's very circumscribed. And if all else fails, I always say, and I'm saying this tongue in cheek and in jest, if all else fails, I say I wasn't at the court yet, so don't blame me. What is very, very important in that case, as far as Justice Sachs' contribution is concerned, is that for the first time in our jurisprudence, and this was then followed, Justice Sachs first articulated this notion of the right to be different. And it's an important notion. You have the right to be different. And then I'm going to just, there's a whole lot of cases. I mean, there's many of them. But I want to make 2 general comments as I conclude before Professor Meyer cracks the whip and chases me off here. I want to make 2 general points about these cases and about Justice Sachs. He is unquestionably the one justice in the history of that court since 1995. The court is turning 30 this year. And since 1995, he's the one justice of that court who has most explicitly and in the widest variety of ways, in the different cases, consistently embraced the notion of adjudication, in other words, of judging, as an engagement with a tension between freedom and constraint, or as he himself describes it in his own life. If you read one of his books, The Alchemy of Law and Life, he describes it as the tension between life and law, or passion and reason. And he's got this language of flexibility, of moving away from rigidity, to take away this notion of everything must be in a compartment and categorized, and this flexibility of seeing things differently in a constitutional state. That was most evidently expressed in Minister of Finance versus Van Heerden. And there are a number of other cases, like Kahunda, NM, independent newspapers, and the Masetla case, where that came through. For him, the perceived safety and stability of rules that we as lawyers cling to, especially lawyers from a common law tradition, is a reason for caution rather than celebration. And Justice Sachs has always been skeptical about the idea that judges can escape the complexities and messiness of social life through the mechanical application of rules, legal rules, and categories. And so for me, Justice Sachs is proof that, and he says so himself, that the Constitution shows us that we are not doomed to be prisoners of history, but that we can reshape our destiny through critical engagement with the past. And that's a very important point. And so today, as the VC has indicated and as is indicated in the booklets, he will speak to us not about the Constitution and the cases, although I have no doubt that he will touch that too. But he will speak to us about what this beloved but troubled country of ours has become, and he will speak against the backdrop of his immense contribution towards all our liberation and towards the constitution-making process and our constitutional jurisprudence. You will see, and you would probably know if you'd read a little bit about his history. In 1988, while he was in Maputo, a car bomb planted by apartheid regime's military intelligence exploded in his car. And that explosion of that car bomb cost him his right arm and the sight in his one eye. What was Justice Sachs's retribution? I put the word in retribution in inverted commas. He calls it soft vengeance. What was that soft vengeance? Is to help build a new free democracy and a solid constitutional state. And that you'll read in the book particular, The Soft Vengeance of a Freedom Fight. And he wrote that book as he was recovering from that terrible, terrible, disgraceful bombing. So it is truly an honor and a privilege today to introduce this great man and son of the soil, Justice Albie Sachs. Thank you.
Judge Stephen, I'll call you. As you were speaking, I was thinking you retire in a year's time, and your first job offer will be to be my Mbongi. But then I decided, no, the Mbongi mustn't speak too brilliantly and be better than the subject. So you haven't even applied for the job and you refused. And I'm amused you speak about the Emmy and the Oscar and now the Albie. When Michelle Obama offered me the Albie and I said, hello, Albie, I actually said, what's going on here? Albie, I said, with the statuette in my arm, in my hand, you've been an iconoclast all your life. Now you're becoming an icon. And then some answers quickly flashed into my head. And the first was, okay, you could have been a Nelson. You could have been an Oliver. You could have been an Ishmael. You could have been Victoria Kenge. So many people you could have been. But I was available. I'm still alive. I'm visible. You can see my trauma. Easy to use, okay. Then I said, but what about the name Albie? There's nothing special about that. I looked up Oscar. Do you know who Oscar was? Anybody in the audience know who Oscar was? Oscar, the famous Oscar, that all the actors and the directors and the sound technicians and it goes on and on and on want to get, was the uncle of a woman member of the Academy Awards jury choosing the best whatever it is. And that uncle was bald. And that statue is bald. So his only claim to fame was that he was bald. And so the value that goes to the Albies will come from all the people who win the awards. And then I said another feature actually was most awards show perfection. This award was based on a drawing by George Clooney himself that showed a long arm and a short arm. And I said, this shows imperfection, human imperfection, and it's an award for all the disabled people in the world. And then I said, finally, I accept with great emotion the award because of George and Amal and George. They are formidable and fun. And that evening was a fun evening with singing and John Oliver the compere and Meryl Streep was there and Michelle and the others, vivacious. And I said so many human rights activities are boring and solemn and heavy. That doesn't help the dispossessed, the marginalized. Without the emotions of humanity, of laughter and fun and enjoyment and the whole range of emotions. And they show that. And also it's part of their love. It's not just something that they're doing. And I might say I did feel some discomfort getting that award because we were always part of a team. Lawyers are part of a team. Judges are part of a team. The freedom fight, we were a huge team. And so many people supported us unknown. In a way, to single out an individual is almost pervert the very notion. But that's the world we're living in now. So I went along, and I'm pleased that I went along, that somehow it's to be associated with something positive. Now, I'm nearly 90, and when you get nearly 90, you don't have many chances to be naughty. And if I can't be naughty in some of the very obvious ways, I can be naughty when I'm invited to speak. And so I'm going to do two naughty things. The one is I'm going to answer the question, is this the country we're fighting for? But only at the end. It's not going to be the gist. I'm going to ask more about the country than is this the country we're fighting for? What is this country? And I'm going to deal specifically with an issue that's been raised so many times and represents such a failure of my generation to explain what happened, the choices we had, the decisions we made, the issues, the personalities. So exciting, so interesting, so challenging, so unusual, so inventive. And we don't tell that story. Who wrote the Constitution? And I'm going to invert the normal lecture process. Instead of having question and answer at the end, with questions coming from the audience and the answer from the speaker, I'm going to ask some questions and ask you to make choices as the audience. And some I'll just have question and answer myself. And the first question is, mention in order of significance, from the most important to the least important, the countries from whose constitutional arrangements we drew the most in getting our constitution. 5. And you get 5 points for mentioning the first, 4 the second, 3, 2, and 1. Anybody, and it includes the platform. Yes.
India, not the UK, doesn't have a written constitution. The US, and that's going to stop. I can't go further than that.
Okay. US, yes, it gets 1 point. It's the first constitution. it's the whole idea of having a constitution, separation of powers, and a judiciary that determines if those powers have been exceeded. Got to give it to the US. You know, when we were thinking in 1990, now we're back from exile, we're out of prison, many of us based at UWC. Dalla Omar is heading the Community Law Center. Wulalang Nuka's there. Zola Squia comes from the Constitutional Committee, the ANC, appointed by Oliver Tambo. Kada Asmal comes from Ireland to join us. I'm there. Bridget Mabandla joins us. It was really an engine room for constitution making. And we invited a group from America, left-wing lawyers, to come. And one of them was actually named, first name was Kimberly Crenshaw. Became very famous as the author of the concept of critical race feminism. And she was there. And somebody in the group said, whatever you do, I'm not going to really try the American accent, take the American Constitution and tear it up. It should begin, we the people. Let me change that. We the white people. We the white male people. We the white male property owning, slave holding people. We the white, and so on, who dispossessed the indigenous people and so on, hereby declare. And I remember my answer at the time was, and we go to the waste paper basket and we pick up the pieces and we put them together again to see what can we draw that's beneficial. And people fighting for their rights in the United States speak about a more perfect union. They claim their rights under the Constitution. It becomes a weapon of struggle and liberation. Okay, one. You spoiled my whole surprise for the audience. Canada comes second. We got a Bill of Rights from Canada. It was very, very timely. Canada in 1980, at a time of Quebec nationalism, armed struggle, independence from the Federation of Canada. Pierre Trudeau, the father of the current Prime Minister, wants to get something that can unify Canadians across the provincial boundaries. So he comes up with a Bill of Rights. We have separate languages, cultures, histories, personalities, but we're all equal in terms of our fundamental rights. And he introduces a Bill of Rights in a very modern form, and they appoint a judiciary headed by Brian Dixon and Bertha Wilson, two extremely progressive, modern thinking judges. Dixon saying, he said to me once, when I asked him, Chief Justice, if I become a judge one day, what advice would you give to me? It's a stupid question. I get asked that all the time now by new judges. But then I was the stupid one asking that question. And he thought and he said, you need a lot of judicial statecraft. And I think you know exactly what that means. It's not just knowledge of law. It's how to deal with the public, with your colleagues, with the press. There's a whole range of different things. Bertha Wilson came from a social democratic background in Scotland. Her husband was a minister of religion. And the agreement was she would support him for 10 years in his ministry, and then he would support her for 10 years as a lawyer. She was such a brilliant law librarian, she was appointed to the bench. And a strong voice for women on that bench interpreting their decisions. So we drew very heavily. We found the decisions from the US Supreme Court all over the place. The majorities becoming minorities and ultra technical on a whole range of different things. It just wasn't very useful, although some of the judges provided us with wonderful material. So that was Canadian support. Germany. Germany, we got the very notion of a constitutional court. We were invited to visit their constitutional court in Karlsruhe, and it was interesting speaking to them, and a court that had a very special role in the post-Nazi period in Germany in resolving disputes that shouldn't be left simply to majorities and minorities in parliament. And also a court that was appointed, interestingly, by parliament completely. There's discussion now about should members of parliament be on the JSC at all. There it's only parliament. And the theory there is if the court is going to have the power to strike down laws of parliament, parliament must then be the ones choosing the judges who are going to strike them down. But it works because they have very, very strong conventions. One will be SPD, Social Democratic Party. Another will be gosh, I'm forgetting, Adenauer's party. Every now and then there will be one from the Federals, every now and then one from the Greens. Then they choose some people every now and then from the legal profession, some from the career judges, some from private practice. And it's worked very, very well, and they've produced a very, very powerful court. But we got more than that from Germany. The big issue I'll come to later, the central drama of the South African constitutional struggle, wasn't the question of unitary state or federal state. That was a secondary issue, but a very important one. And the big battle, it was even the F word. You didn't say federalism in the ranks of the liberation movement where I was in those days. And the big battle was going to be who has the final word, the legislature national or the legislature in what's now the provinces. And we go to Germany, and there's Professor Hans-Peter Schneider, University of Hanover, and he tells a group of us, this is now from the ANC Constitutional Committee, he says, first of all, well, what you must do in South Africa, and I say, Professor Schneider, don't tell us what we must do. Tell us what you do in Germany, and if it's useful for us, we will accept. He accepted totally. And he said in Germany, we don't have a competition between their powers. We have concurrent powers. So trade, education, health, agriculture are all concurrent powers, provincial and national. And then you have a tiebreaker if it's the national and the Constitutional Court decides if there happens to be a clash. We haven't had a single clash in that area. We resolved what was looming to be the second most important issue simply by learning from German experience. Also from Germany, in the original first elections, the parliament had a National Assembly and a Senate. And we decided not to continue with the Senate, elected in another kind of a way, but to have something modeled on the German Bundesrat, the upper house, where the provinces send delegates to the parliament. And that serves a double purpose. The provinces bring their understanding, their feelings, and so on to the center, but they also bring the center to the provinces. And I think by and large, that's proved quite useful in South Africa, better than a Senate that's there simply to block or support what the lower house does. So these are things that we got from Germany. And you get 3 for Germany. You said Germany, yeah? You
India.
didn't?
No.
I'm giving you 3 for nothing. Okay. You get 4 for India.
Yeah.
4 for India.
I said Canada.
Now let me say what came from India. The most important thing that came from India was their Constituent Assembly. Parliament, voted for by the whole people, writing our Constitution. There was a huge battle. Who's going to write the Constitution? Will it be done at Kempton Park by self-appointed delegates? At a time when we used to call them the enemy, then we made some progress, we call them the regime. Then, you remember, we didn't formally take decisions. Then it became the bloody government. And at the end, it was the other side.
Yeah.
So now it's between the enemy and the regime. And they had the guns, they had the power, they in touch with controlling the economy, the civil service, everything. I'll say we, then, that's long before I became a judge, we had manifest justice on our side. We had huge world opinion on our side. We had enormous support from Africa. We had the great majority of people in South Africa. I think a certain president, whose name I'm not going to mention, did his predictions on, in those days, he's a big cigarette smoker. You could buy packets of 50. And his calculations that we'll have the traditional leaders, we'll have the minorities, we will have the faith communities and so on. We can even get a majority. It turned out, of course, that wasn't the position. But they're in power. And we want them to put down their guns. We want them to hand over the instruments of legislation, the executive, the presidency, the army, the police force. They're not just going to let go. They're insisting on what they call certain guarantees, and guarantees for minorities. And that's why they wanted us to draft the Constitution at Kempton Park and put it to a referendum, take it or leave it. Now, that only gives the people a take it or leave it. You want the vote, you want some freedom from the oppressive laws, you take it, but you hate it. The Constitution would have been a barrier to transformation and change. It would have been the enemy. And we, our side, wanted the Constitution to be seen as the doorway to freedom, associated with transformation and change. So the idea then of saying only a body that has a mandate from the whole nation will have the legitimacy to draft a constitution for South Africa, that came from India. They didn't have national elections, but they had very, very wide representation. And they actually got somebody from the Dalit community, the so-called untouchables, to be the chair of that session. And the Indian constitution, that enormous country with huge problems of every kind, it's somehow that constitution has stood the test of time. But also from India, we got the importance of the Independent Electoral Commission. They sent a whole team of people here, advice on to ensure that those in power don't rig elections, don't control and monopolize the counting of votes. And that's absolutely fulcral, central, foundational to democracy and the vote. I don't think the vote is everything, but the vote is something you can't do without. And without the vote being regarded as reliable and dependable, everything else fails. And I just feel so proud in that sense of what we achieved in South Africa. I'm sad to say you go to Mozambique and people, many people speak, there are going to be elections, but we can't trust the outcome. I was recently in Zanzibar. They're saying the same thing in Tanzania. People are beginning to make murmurs similar to that in Namibia. So it's not only when the army seizes power and refuses to recognize the results, it's when the vote is rigged. So we had to build in protections against that. And that led to the whole idea of the Chapter 9 institutions, spreading it to the JSC, Auditor General, and other things. We got that idea from India. And finally, we got, through an amusing experience, our Finance and Fiscal Commission from India. Why? Because Philip van Reineveld, who happened to be the son of the famous cricket player, Clive van Reineveld, belonged to the Development Action Group supporting the freedom struggle. He went to Amsterdam to further his studies in development studies. He met a woman from India, fell in love with her, followed her to India, and discovered in India the whole question in all countries is taxation revenue is extremely important for every country. But one of the issues is how do you get transfers from well-endowed regions to lesser endowed regions? And Germany has 100%, and then some regions from the central budget get 101%, and some get 99%. That's one way of ensuring transfers. India has a much more flexible system, Finance and Fiscal Commission, so we got that from India as well. So that's why India gets 4 points. And the fifth one, last chance. Anybody? Last chance for the first time? Ireland. No, for the second time? Gone. Namibia. Namibia, our neighbor Namibia. We got more from Namibia than from anywhere else. Namibia had a parliament that adopted their constitution. The constitution that they adopted had to comply with certain principles laid down in what was called the White Paper, which would be negotiated by the contact group Western nations and accepted by the United Nations. And they were very broad principles. Separation of powers, universal franchise. I think it included social and economic rights and fundamental rights, a Bill of Rights. And the answer of the liberation movement then to the regime was only a democratically elected body will have the authority to draft a constitution for South Africa. And you guys, you're worried. You're worried that Afrikaans is going to be diminished as a language. You're worried that the Dutch Reformed Church is going to be marginalized. You're worried that we will do to you what you did to us, that we're going to drive you into the sea. And we understand those worries. But they're not just worries that you have. They're worries that all people should have. That all people should have. We want a constitution for the nation. We want a constitution for never again. We want a constitution for the values we were fighting for. We want a constitution based on human dignity. We want a constitution based on foundational principles, fundamental principles, rights for everybody. So we will lay down those principles in advance. They're not concessions. We're not saying language equality because we want to be nice to you. We believe in it. We're not saying that people's privacy should be protected because we want to be nice to you. We believe in it. We're not saying we don't want racial discrimination, black, white, brown, whatever, because we want to be nice to you. We believe in it. We want to get beyond that world of determining people's fates on their appearance, the language they speak, the religion, how they look, who their parents were. These are things we want. They're not concessions. These are principles. And we put in a whole series of principles in that way. We thought it would be 4 or 5. There were 34. And some of them had clause A, B, C, D. And these would be binding on the constitution-making body. Then we said it's not going to be simple majoritarianism. That phrase was being used as though simple majoritarianism was worse than Marxism-Leninism. Simple majoritarianism. The whites had had simple majoritarianism since 1910. It only becomes terrible when the majority is not white. But we didn't want simple majoritarianism. We wanted everybody in there. And we said a 2/3 majority would be required. I'm speaking of we, the liberation movement side, said proportional representation. We wanted everybody there. We didn't want anybody to say this is not our constitution. We didn't want the generals and the army and the people with guns to say it's not our constitution. We had no part of it. It's imposed upon us. We wanted everybody there. We always quoted Lyndon Johnson, I'd rather have the bastards in the tent pissing out than out the tent pissing in. I'm saying that now at the time of government national unity is very much in the news. And then the question was, but who would decide if the principles have been agreed to or not? What was the answer? Anybody? A constitutional court. That's why we have a constitutional court in South Africa, not a Supreme Court, a constitutional court. That was the origins of the constitutional court. So this now is the challenge. And did we get agreement? Did the enemy regime agree to this proposal? At first, not. So if I throw out the question, answered myself, why did negotiations break down? They broke down because we had two completely different visions of the governmental structure in a new South Africa. The vision of the regime was power sharing. They couldn't get beyond thinking in racial ethnic groups. Power sharing between Zulus, Afrikaners, others. They disguised a little bit, not ethnic expressly, political parties representing Zulus, Afrikaners, and others. And the top three would each choose a president. We would have had three presidents, Mandela on Monday, de Klerk on Tuesday, Buthelezi on Wednesday. You laugh, it was actually going to be 1 year, 1 year, 1 year, and they would have to agree by consensus. And they would have an upper house that would be the house of the minority parties in the lower house. We call it the house of losers. And that upper house would have a veto, the losing parties, over issues of own affairs. You can't go halfway between that. You can't have, instead of 3 presidents, 1.5 presidents. And they wouldn't concede to majority rule, non-racial franchise, majority rule, protections from a Bill of Rights. And the Bill of Rights protects not because you're white, not because you're black, not because you're brown, not because you're majority, not because you're minority, because you're a human being. Because you're a human being. It was equality and human dignity at its most profound. Everybody counts in South Africa now. And a huge, if you like, generosity from the majority, from the Robben Island prisoners, from the exiles, from the people living in the townships, on the farms, going down in the mines. But it wasn't, in a sense, it was a generosity. It made a lot of practical sense because you can keep the economy going, you can use the skills of everybody, you're not investing in endless war and bitterness. But it's also part of a higher vision. I always felt that with Oliver Tambo, that he felt the whites in this country will never be open enough to imagine a country for everybody equal. They just can't. Their history doesn't allow them to. We African people have suffered so much for being who we are. We will prove to ourselves, to the world, that it is possible. It is possible. This is a source of strength, of enormous moral strength. And that moral strength sometimes carries you through where other forms of strength don't get your way through. Anyhow, let me move on to the next question I'm throwing out to you. After I was blown up, by the way, I was a little bit out of the constitution-making, constitution idealizing, imagining game in Lusaka. And I didn't learn about the Harare Declaration. And I only discovered things that were happening while I was in hospital. I obviously wasn't indispensable. It was a surprise to me, and I find it a surprise to most South Africans. How many of you have heard of the Harare Declaration? Put up your hands. Okay, so I see maybe less than 10%. I'm going to throw out, the Harare Declaration was drafted by Oliver Tambo, Thabo Mbeki, Zola Square, Richard Mabandla, and others, in 1989 in Lusaka. And Oliver, as we called him, flew to Julius Nyerere to get advice in a little Cessna plane with his head and his knees, back to Harare, flew to Luanda, speak to Santos, back to Harare, down to Tanzania, back to Harare, and he had a stroke. The others carried on afterwards. He literally gave his life for that document. And that document encapsulated a set of principles that a number of us had adopted at a seminar. It was called an in-house seminar on constitutional principles at the University of Lusaka, University of Zambia, in 1988. It was actually on about early in March, and I was blown up in April. So if I died, at least I would have accomplished that. Happily for me, I've lived on to see those principles we adopted. Now, going into the Harare Declaration, with very important advice given to us by Julius Nyerere in particular, and the question to you now is, and to even those who know about the Harare Declaration, which of the following international institutions accepted the Harare Declaration drawn up by Oliver Tambo and co? The OAU is 1. The non-aligned movement is 2. The Commonwealth is 3. And the United Nations General Assembly is 4. Anybody? Okay. So Brother Steve says the OAU and the non-aligned movement. The Commonwealth. They did accept. Went to the Commonwealth. It was extremely discomforting for Margaret Thatcher. Extremely. She was totally isolated. She had to put up a hand. She had to accept. It went to the General Assembly. And Thabo Mbeki describes how they had to meet each block in the UN separately. They couldn't sleep. For 3 nights and 3 days, they couldn't sleep. And eventually it was accepted by acclamation. So President de Klerk's hands were tied. And if you follow the sequence from then onwards, it follows the Harare Declaration exactly. And that brings me to the next question. Was the Constitution of South Africa a European document expressing European ideas imposed upon the African people? Or was it a document of the African people imposed upon the people who call themselves European? Now, many people are saying it's the latter. It was a document historically imposed by the African people, fighting for rights, believing in universality of human rights, against the apartheid notions, against the colonial notions, against the racist notions. The whole theme of rights, and Paulo Jordan was the author of this importance of relying on fundamental rights already in 1985, constitutional proposals we made from all over the world. And they all had one objective: to provide for one person, one vote, make sure the whites remain on top. The most intricate arrangements you could ever imagine. We even had one interesting meeting with professors from the United States. This was before TV, and not before virtual reality. So there were just telephones. And one of their top professors who'd written a book on how you could solve the South African problem with these intricate arrangements said, what you need in South Africa, he said, is lawyers are always saying on the one hand, on the other, what you need in South Africa is a one-armed lawyer. So we all burst out laughing because that was on the telephone. He didn't see that. So Paulo Jordan said, comrades, it's inevitable we're going to have universal franchise in South Africa. And regime and capital are going to try to defend their position through group rights, through making it an existential racial issue, and through making the issue of the survival of the whites the center point of the whole analysis. We don't want United Nations to take over that project because United Nations will support the West and they will focus on the white minority and their interests. And our answer to the claims for protection is none of those projects that are being presented, but a Bill of Rights. He said the ANC had a Bill of Rights in 1923. Very polite Bill of Rights. In 1944, during the World War II, Churchill, Roosevelt, Atlantic Charter, ANC saying, what about us in South Africa? What do we want? A very powerful Bill of Rights in African claims. 1955, the Freedom Charter. People demanding their rights. I was there. I was one of a handful of white people. The songs we were singing were African songs. The whole feeling was African. Demanding rights. We demand our rights. We demand that the people shall govern. The demands came from the people, from poor people, from the unions, from the women's movement. So was it a case really? The whites were saying, rights, democracy, free press, sure, for us white people. Not for blacks. Not for blacks. Tricameral, okay, we can allow the other minorities subaltern rights. Black people saying, we want rights, we demand rights. And for me, it's a little bit sad, the intense African humanism and creativity of the people who were my leaders. I was the soldier of Lutuli. Soldier Lutuli. I used to sing those songs. Was so creative and so forceful, and to wipe them out of history and to see them as stooges of the whites, capitulating to lawyers and financiers, is so disrespectful to our people who struggled and struggle so hard that it's a source of great distress to me. I'm nearing the conclusion of this part before I come to Kimberly. A question to you. How many people wrote our Constitution? Was it 4? Was it 17? Was it 50? Was it 490? Was it 20 million? Okay, 20 million is one of the answers. 20 million, 27th of April, 1994. We speak a lot about it this year. Other countries, they get independence flag comes down, your flag goes up, the band plays, everybody cheers, lots of dignitaries, and you're independent. With us, 20 million people voted. That act of voting gave us our independence. It gave us our country. 20 million. That's one reason why the Constitution means so much to us. I remember the story of the elderly African man somewhere in the north of the country, brought in a wheelbarrow. He wanted to vote before he died. That idea of the vote was dignity. It wasn't just electing those into power. So the Constitution then, getting the Constitution was achieved through immense public participation in that sense. But what about the actual drafters of the Constitution? 4, 17, 50, or 490? Come on, I made it easy for you. One of the 490 is speaking. 490. The Constitution wasn't written by lawyers appointed by Mandela speaking to Oppenheimer and give us a Constitution. It was in Parliament. Heated debates, huge outreach. More than 2 million people wrote in. Public involvement at all stages. Even wonderful programs by Dennis Davis on the future, on capital punishment, on gay rights, on federalism, debates, discussions, involvement. But the actual drafting was done by the 490. And the people there were overwhelmingly, in the majority, people who'd been in resistance, in prison, in exile, people who'd been in the women's movement. Frenny Jinwala, now she's not the Speaker of the House. She's, today I'm a woman. I don't care what the ANC leadership tells me, I'm a woman. And 3 out of every 10 in the ANC list had to be women, so there was a block, 30% ANC women in Parliament, in the Assembly. And they're speaking to women in other parties and the National Coalition of Women outside. We had workers, trade union movement. I was going to put the question to you, but it's taking up too much time now. Which institution did more for public education in democracy? Universities, the schools, the faith communities, the political parties, or the trade union movement? The unions. The unions. National Union of Mine Workers, 400,000 miners voting for their shop stewards, across lines of language, region, country of origin, for leaders they could trust, controlling money throughout the country, huge educational industry there. These were the people in Parliament, strong workers' rights. We take them for granted. No unfair labor practices. I don't think any other constitution in the world has that. The right to strike, subject to limitations. The right to independent unions, not unions set up by the government to carry out governmental instructions. Very, very powerful. And I'll conclude this part then by saying, what was the role of the Constitutional Court? This marvelous Constitution, what did we, 11 unelected judges, do in that historical moment to this beautiful document, carefully crafted, adopted on the last day, not at midnight, but late in the afternoon after 2 years were allowed. And we were lucky it was a leap year, so we had 1 extra day. The Constitutional Court declared the Constitution to be unconstitutional. What? We declared in overwhelmingly it complied with the principles agreed to. But in 9 respects it didn't. And the most important one was in terms of the not substantially reducing provincial powers. I remember that so vividly, I can't help telling this story. It was the most difficult issue. It was put in to please the IFP and Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi. And there had been some more powers given than the Constitution had, and some less. We went home to consider. We wake up in the morning to discover Chief Justice, what is called President of the Constitutional Court, Arthur Chaskelson, was held up in his home the night before. He comes in, and you know, after something like that, you're all full of laughter, because he's safe. And he tells us the story, and we kind of roar with laughter. You think it was a comedy program. And he said, I'm driving in, and at a simple house, low hedge. The next thing is a pistol at his head, following him into the garage. He said in his nervousness, happily he dropped his keys because he had all his documents. He's worried about his documents from the Constitutional Court. And the next thing, he and Lorraine are lying down in their main room while the robbers are taking the electronic equipment and so on. And suddenly the answer to the question comes to him. He can't do anything else. He's lying down there. He's not going to waste time. And the answer comes to him. And he wants to rush to the computer to type it up. But he says his wife, Lorraine, will kill him. But meanwhile, she has been composing poetry, so she rushes to the computer and she writes her poems. And in the end, he decides, he's worked out that there has been a substantial reduction. And another point was that there hadn't been sufficient entrenchment given to the public protector. It was going to be 50%, and we said that's not substantial enough. It's got to be more than that. And there are various other technical things. You go back to Parliament, they make the changes, and it's signed into law. But let me tell you about some of the objections that we rejected, because they're very relevant to current debates. One of them was from the Free Market Foundation. And they said if workers have the right to strike, then employers should have the right to lock out. And that had been fought all the way through in Cape Town, been rejected, and we rejected that. And we were fortunate that we had a labour law expert, Kate O'Regan, who'd done a PhD at the University of London, and we understood the only power workers have is to withdraw their labour. The employers have the power of ownership, of control. It's not equivalent. Then we had Free Market Foundation, others, saying that the interim constitution had a strongly entrenched right to property, to hold and dispose of property that could be subjected to limitations in the public interest. The final constitution only has a right not arbitrarily to be deprived of property, and that's much, much, much weaker. And we looked at the constitutional principles, and they simply said that the interim constitution, that Parliament must have regard to the interim constitution, but is not bound to apply the interim constitution. So we rejected that. We had an objection to social and economic rights not being the province of judges, also from a conservative group, and we rejected that. Finally, we had a very strong rejection from Contra Lesser on the question of customary law. And they said, we're pleased to see customary law is recognized on an equal basis with the common law in our Constitution. But it's made subject to the other principles in the Bill of Rights. And that means that the principle of patriarchy, which is central to customary law, is being ignored. Therefore, customary law is not customary law. And it was a rather extraordinary day because Winnie Mandela came representing them. She found her way into my chambers. She flung her arms around me, gave me a big kiss. Not exactly the way you should start off discussions about the problem they had, should they come in their capacity as lawyers, advocates, or their capacity as traditional leaders? I said, I can't answer that. Speak to Arthur Chaskelson. So Judge Arthur jokingly said, why don't you come as advocates dressed in your traditional regalia? But he was making a joke. They took him seriously. So they had to go to their hotels. They came late. We all blamed Winnie for them coming late. They actually looked, I must say, I'm not proposing this for anything in the future, but they looked fantastic. And it was actually very beautiful in the court to see people dressed in that way arguing. But we rejected their argument. We rejected their argument. Customary law, like the common law, is subject to the Constitution. Statute is subject to the Constitution. Why should there be a sovereign position given to customary law, traditional law, outside of the values and the rules of binding on the whole nation? And if traditional leaders want to feel they are part of the nation, then they accept the rights and responsibilities that go with the whole nation. And that was a very, very important moment. So now I've been at some pains to communicate about a certain portion of the questions I was going to throw out to you, important ones. And they go towards answering the question, is this country we were fighting for? And my answer is yes. It is the country we're fighting for. We've got a constitution. We've got rights. We've got mechanisms. But is it the society we're fighting for? And what is the relationship between the constitution and the society? If you want to hear my answer to that, you'll have to come to Bloemfontein when I'm there in a couple of weeks, I think, speaking at the university on that particular theme. Kimberley. The age of discovery, diamonds were discovered at a place that was called Kimberley. I've now been discovering Kimberley. What is this place? Even the name Kimberley, from a lord in England who never came close, whose vote was needed in Parliament. And yet Kimberley Crenshaw, this great American Negro, is called Kimberley. And it's been a very exciting journey for me. Vanessa and I have been invited to look at the Big Hole Museum to make proposals for upgrading it, updating it. And we're making very vigorous proposals because we feel it's an extraordinary place. It's got some great features, but it's missing out hugely. First of all, it's not dramatic. We say have zip lines. Make that hole not just a be careful, don't fall into the hole. A spectacular place. Make it part of the city. Obviously properly protected. It's got that visualized thing. You go down, you think you're going down in. That's very, very nice. That's a tiny bit of what can be done. Mostly it's boards up there. We're living in a digital age now. Diamonds, wow, what chances you've got. They tell the story. You're going to read the story of taking this piece of clay and earth, polishing it. You show it. You show the people who are doing it. The stories are more explosive than the explosives in the mind. Roads. Now, De Beers owned that place. They want a space. They want a legacy. It means facing up to the bitterness of the legacy, but also what grew out of it, and to also what can become. And it will be so advantageous. My job is not to save De Beer's name, to anybody's name. I've got enough to do, in the world, and enough people to save if I want to be a savior without trying to save Nicky Oppenheimer. And I don't think he'd want to be saved by me. That's not the issue. It's somehow we're building this new country with all the different resources. And I find myself meeting with people and engaging projects in ways I never imagined before. And we need truth-telling and strong storytelling and diverse storytelling. You can't just tell that story from the point of view of a journalist from London coming. That's okay for journalists, for tourists from London or Canada. That's for our people. It's got to tell the story for Haile people first, and then for people from London afterwards. And Rhodes was such an extraordinary person. 2 countries were named after him. There's a university still named after him. Why was there this huge Rhodes must fall movement? Sort of capture that. Don't come up with a simple analysis of what happened about imperialism. Tell it in vivid terms. And people respect hard, truthful storytelling. There's not a single woman featured except for Marilyn Monroe. You would believe that Kimberley and the diamond industry grew without women being involved at all. And I discovered Charlotte Manier, came from Kimberley. And I've just been to a book launch of a novel by Zubeida Jaffa on Charlotte. It's called The Making of Charlotte, written as a novel. And a lot of it's her time in Kimberley. And Kimberley is the origin space of the Industrial Revolution, of financial development in Southern Africa. It's the origin space of African nationalism, where people came from different African communities, meeting up with each other, facing similar forms of oppression, attempts to keep them divided, and transcending without in any way diminishing their language, their culture, and so on, transcending those limitations. And who's part of what Zubeida calls the Kimberley Circle? Somebody after whom a university, Sol Plaatje, has been created. There's something, for me, magnificent in comparing the trajectory of Charlotte Manier and Sol Plaatje, these nobodies, these nothings, except with wonderful spirit, a gleam, energy, belief, and Cecil John Rhodes from outside, with his vision of imperialism, railway from Cape to Cairo, British domination throughout the continent. And who fell? Who had to fall? It wasn't Sol Plaatje who fell. It wasn't Charlotte Manier who fell. It was Rhodes who fell. So these are stories, they need to be told, how can I say, with heart, with feeling, with thoughtfulness, with art. That's the second theme that Vanessa and I are suggesting. The third is it's a wonderful place for intellectual activity. It's not just a place for tourists. It's a place you can invite people from all over to come because it's so extraordinary, but a place of learning, of imagination, of dreams, of contestation, and would make a marvelous partner for Sol Plaatje University in activities and engagement. So if they listen to even a tenth of what Vanessa and I suggest, you can accept approaches. And I'm going to say publicly now something that I said over breakfast this morning to my colleague Steve. Another suggestion I'm going to make is that the Rhodes Scholarships, which now are given to Sachs School, which I attended, to Bishop School at Rondebosch or Paul Roos, and now to a girls' school in the Cape area, that they include a school from Kimberley. If they want a legacy that's meaningful, if they want a legacy that's tangible, that connects with the past, and that, if you like, gives a little less negative association with the name Rhodes, there's no better way of doing it than that. Thank you, audience. As you notice, I haven't followed any protocol. I haven't said, as speakers normally say, it's a great honor to be invited to give this lecture. I don't see it as an honor. I see it as a great connection to have. And it's normally, I feel humble. I don't feel humble at all. I feel excited. I feel connected. And thank you to you and to your patience in listening, and thank you to the team. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, our speaker deserves another round of applause.
Now, I'm not De Beers, but I've got some gifts to offer. This is, how many copies have I got of the? 2. So one goes through nepotism to my brother Steve, and other goes more objectively, we'll get it to you afterwards, to the Vice Chancellor. And it's recognize it?
Yep.
The preamble to our Constitution, and it's in a special font, which we printed. It's the Constitutional Court font. And it's based on graffiti in the old prison, together with some street signs and the writing of our colleague Zach Yakub, who's blind. He's never seen his own handwriting. And the winner of the competition said he saw a bee made by Zach, and that became the basis for that whole font. So that's the first. And if you want to hear about, you want to get documentation, I told you about the Harare Declaration, but it's much deeper than that. One of the great heroes of world history and world legal thinking, Oliver Tambo, he was really a constitutionalist at heart and a believer in fundamental rights. And when he discovered that captives of the ANC in the camps were being treated brutally, he set up a commission of inquiry. He asked me to help write a code of conduct. For him, it was impossible that an organization fighting for freedom should behave brutally. It not only brutalized the victims, it brutalized ourselves, it brutalized our ideals. And all that story is told here, together with a lot of other detail that Andre Ordendal found. So this, how many copies have I got? 2. So one on the nepotistic principle. You see, I'm an honest crook, huh? And then there'll be another one for the...
So we had scheduled a question and answer session, which was turned on its head a little bit, but our Chancellor will facilitate a few questions that our honored guest will answer. We're going to ask that you raise your hand Justice Majid will indicate who gets the opportunity to ask the questions, and then we will give Justice Sachs an opportunity to respond.
So I'm going to raise the hand first because I have a question. This morning, Justice Sachs and I had breakfast and we spoke about the court and how things have changed and about, Kimberley and life in general and so on. But you related a story that really touched me. It's a story of your train journey and what happened. If you don't think it's too personal to yourself, then would you mind sharing it with us? It's such a touching story. Thank you.
Okay, just to give you a bit of my background, it's relevant here. My dad was Sol Plaatje Sachs, General Secretary of the Garment Workers Union. It makes me very, and I might mention the Women's March, the famous march, had Lillian Ngoyi and Helen Joseph, both from the Garment Workers Union. Rahima
Musa.
from the Food and Canning Workers Union, and Sophie Peters from the Textile Workers Union. So it was not only the democratic struggle, but also the women's struggle, very much based on the union movement. My mother, Ray, used to say, tidy up, Uncle Moses is coming. And Uncle Moses wasn't Moses Cohen or Moses Cantor, he's Moses Kotani. Because Uncle Moses, General Secretary of the Communist Party, was my mother's boss. And he used to joke afterwards, Comrade Ray taught me to read and write, now I'm her boss. So I grew up in that world where it was normal for a black person to be highly respected and admired by a white woman, my mother. That was the normal world. And the world outside was the abnormal one. And in a sense, that was an enormous blessing for me. But it also meant I was separated from my dad in Joburg. So from the age of 6 and my brother 5, we would take a train and go up to Joburg and be collected and stay with my dad or friends of my dad. And Kimberley was a station. You could get off the train. It stopped here for a long time. You could walk up and down and then get back onto the train. The journey's almost over. And then there was a stop just beyond Kimberley. And that was before you went to sleep for the last part of the journey. And you had a little bit of chicken over those round tins you used to have with sandwiches and eggs and different things to eat. And all the food you had, you'd go over to the windows and there'd be local children there and you'd throw the food out. And I had very mixed feelings. I felt so sad that there were children who had to do that for food, but so glad that I was giving food. And the children were very, very happy to get it. Years later, a book is written by somebody living in that area. He wrote it in ordinary handwriting, and he gave it to a well-known writer. I'm not sure if he wrote it in English or Afrikaans. I might be wrong on that, but I read it in English eventually. And it's an amazing story, a beautifully written story, imaginative, magic realism story. And I'm asked to write an introduction or speak at the launch. And I speak at the launch, and he's there, and I say, I know nothing about that north part of South Africa, except I used to get on the train and I used to throw food out to the children. And he said I was one of those children. And he thanked me. He wasn't angry with me. He actually thanked me. And it was a very poignant and beautiful moment for me to feel a reconnection that now I'm not dishing out food that I don't need. Now he's a writer who's published and recognized.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are there any questions? Let's keep it short and no speeches, please.
Okay.
There's one there. Thank you, sir. Just raise your voice. Oh, there's a mic. Sorry.
There's a mic there.
Good evening to everybody. Judge, if you don't mind, you on a lighter note, but a serious note. The issue of Justice Slope. What's your take on it?
Justice Slope.
Judge Slope,
Okay.
one of the JSC that there's this court case.
Yes.
What's your take on it? I can't answer it.
My take is I don't have a take. As a judge, I'm defunct. Functus, they call it. and I won't comment. I'll just make a generalized comment on how painful it has been for me to see people whom I was in the struggle with. It's not John Sloppy, I wasn't in the struggle with him. One of whom was actually my leader in Mozambique, caught up in ways where he's alleged to have violated the Constitution. And I'm proud the Constitution is there to deal with the issues. I'm sad to see that somebody whom I admired once and thought very, very close, very, very close to, we would sing freedom songs around the graves of people who had been murdered, and wonder, would we be next? You know, there was space there. Would we be next? It's a great sadness. It's a great sadness. But that's not an answer to your question.
We can take one or
One-
two more.
One more, two more. If you keep it short, maybe two. One more, two more.
We have
Yes.
one over there.
There's two there. You,
Yeah.
one there and one there. Thank you. Questions closed after this. The gentleman with the cap. There you go.
Yeah, with the cap, and then in the back.
Good evening, people. It's truly an honor to ask this question to Mr. Sash. Sir, my question is, as a youth of South Africa, sir, I've noticed that we're sort of losing our touch with the rich history we have within South Africa, sir. And if I make a perfect example, sir, within William Prescott, Mr. Majid's past school, the learners don't actually know him, sir. So, in sir's opinion, how would sir encourage the rekindling of the new generation to want to go back into the past to learn about the legendary history of South Africa, sir?
Thank you. Did you hear that?
No, now I could claim deafness and say I couldn't hear the question. But I'll ask.
He's basically saying that as one of the youth
Youth.
in the country, how do we rekindle their knowledge and their interest in the
Yes.
history?
Yes.
Because many of these things they don't know.
Okay. Oh, that one I heard very well. Yes. Now, thank you for that. It's really my main surviving task is just to get these stories out, to get people to record their memories. I've got some funding to get the journalist Mushweshri Monari
Yes.
to write the story of the making of the Constitution in popular language. He's becoming a lawyer, which is not bad. It's not against him, but he's not writing it for lawyers. He's writing it for the general public. It's such an exciting, interesting story. That's something we have to do. And I'm telling stories all the time. Even this is being filmed now. And the hope is that, you know, you're representative of quite a good chunk of Kimberley, that you are contributing towards enabling people in other parts of the country to hear the story. But truly it's been a failure on our part. You can't just say we honor the sacrifices of the people who struggled. It's too bland. You can't just say our glorious people's army fought, and it's too abstract. We've got to deal with the problems, how we encountered them, what we achieved. We've got to ask. The Constitution creates a beautiful vision of a wonderful country, of people filled, if you like, with Ubuntu, relating and connecting with each other and caring for each other. And that's not the South Africa we're living in. We've got to ask why. But we've also got to understand, how does the Constitution give us possibilities? And what did we do when constitutional negotiations broke down? In the end, we didn't have a constitution then, just had the negative constitution. It was rolling mass action that was vital to resolve the dispute. We need powerful workers' movements, strong women's movements. Universities have a very, very big role to play, and they're granted a certain measure of autonomy in the Constitution and freedom of cultural, scientific activity in the Constitution. These are freedoms we fought hard for and freedoms that have to be used.
Thanks very much. Let's give somebody the last
Yeah,
one.
we had
please.
the last one in the back.
I'd love at least one woman to.
Any ladies?
Here's one woman
There's
for
one
you.
there. There.
Hello, Albie Sachs. We love you too much. My question to you is, what do you think of Zuma? And how come Muammar Gaddafi was assassinated under Zuma's presidency when he advocated for one Africa? Thank you.
I'm not sure I heard that. If you
What
say,
do I think of Zuma?
what do you think of Zuma? That's a very wide question. What do you want to be more specific? And just speak a bit slower.
Is Zuma a good enough leader to get us to where we want to be as one Africa? Can we believe in Zuma? And my problem with Zuma is the fact that it was under his presidency that Muammar Gaddafi was assassinated, when Muammar Gaddafi advocated for one Africa. So can you just
you.
assist there, please?
You heard that.
No.
She's asking, is former President Zuma the right person to lead us to this vision of one Africa?
Yeah.
And the reason why she asked that is because while he was president, the other person who was advocating for one Africa was Muammar Gaddafi, and he was assassinated at that time.
Okay.
That's the question.
Yeah. Okay. I can answer the question more clearly on Gaddafi. I think the assassination of Gaddafi was a great mistake by the West, thinking that they kill the leader and the problems are solved. And Libya to this day hasn't recovered.
Yes.
And the Organization of African Unity was moving to get Gaddafi out of the country and to get the Gaddafi forces to become part of the United Forces. That's easier to answer than your main question. But it would be quite improper for me as a former judge to give my comments. Albie Sachs believes, the judges believe, this is where they stand, this is what they think. It sometimes it's very painful, I can't speak out. Sometimes it's very propitious that I can't speak out. And today I'm glad I'm not speaking out on that, because people remember that answer, and all the other wisdom
Yes.
I'm trying
Yeah,
to
thank you.
impart
Yeah.
will be completely forgotten.
I would like to add something to that. You must remember, ma'am, there's a thing that says, once a judge, always a judge. It means that we're in the privileged position that once you retire, your salary continues for life. So we are judges for life. That is a huge privilege, but it's also a huge responsibility. So in theory, I doubt it will ever happen, but in theory, if Justice Sachs is going to speak out of turn as a judge, once a judge, always a judge, he could in theory be subject to disciplinary measures. So we operate within those constraints. Bear that in mind.
Steve, you might be interested to know that we even rule beyond the grave.
Yes.
Justice Majid, can we take the last question?
This is the very last one.
The very last one, Mr.
Justice Sachs
Oliphant.
is already becoming a bit uncomfortable. Please.
Mr. Oliphant, last question, and please, as quick as possible to the question.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Justice Sachs, I believe you when you're saying that we are living in a digital era right now. And my question would be that, is the Constitution used in the right manner at this current age to preserve and protect humanity? Because now my concern comes from the fact that here in the Northern Cape, we are sitting at 849 learners that has applied to study using NSFAS. Out of all the provinces, we are perishing. How do we use the Constitution to ensure that young generation that is upcoming, your 2000s, they are being channeled in a manner whereby their humanity will be preserved for the sake of the success of the country? Thank you.
Did you hear that one?
No.
It was a long answer, but a long question, but I think the short inquiry is, we live in a digital era, but how do we use the Constitution to make sure that learners from and students from this province also gets included in whatever resources are allocated, lest they be left behind? Did I more or less capture that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've captured the question more or less. Yeah, thank you. it's a very wide question. I
Yes,
don't know
no,
what
I think it's a very, very important question, and I don't hesitate to be modest on this one. I don't even have a cell phone, let alone be an active member of the digital world. I don't know what the answer is, but I know there has to be an answer. That the digital access is particularly important in a country where people are very widespread and often far from centers of learning. And it does give me a chance to say something I meant to say earlier on about the Northern Cape. And that is, in a way, turning disadvantage into advantage. And the mining industry, industrial revolution starts here. But the big building, the factories, all up in the north. But you've got clear skies. You've got the telescopes. Because it's not polluted. The land is arid. It's not easy for farming. But the advantage is the natural vegetation, unique in the world, is growing and of interest to the whole world. You have a hard climate with sun and wind, and the advantage is renewable energy sources. The extent to which this province is still probably the most natural part of South Africa gives potential for something kind of unique, that it hasn't been ravaged by industrialization, by overcrowding, that there is land, there is space. And then the last quality, I adored Yvonne Mogoro. She was the best ambassador Kimberley and Northern Province could ever have had.
Northern Cape.
Did I say
Northern Province.
Northern Cape has ever had. And she brought something very special to the court. It was the harbinger of something. Zubaida Jaffa mentioned Charlotte Manier, the first woman graduate in South Africa. Not black woman, first woman graduate was from Kimberley. And between the years 2000 and 2020, 200,000 women graduated in South Africa. It's a sign of how things have grown. I thought Yvonne coming with Ubuntu, introducing it into legal thinking automatically. It hadn't been squeezed out of her. If she'd spent a lot of time in Cambridge or Philadelphia, then it might have been squeezed out of her. She brought it with her automatically. Her sense of justice couldn't be detached from Ubuntu. And I thought her humor and lightness and lack of pomposity was unique. But then I had breakfast with this guy. And you're not a woman. You've got that same lightness, that same warmth, that same lack of pomposity. And for me, this is a Northern Cape quality. It's a Kimberley quality, and it's as precious as the non-polluted air in the north and the unravaged land. And potentially these are huge resources. And if we can find the, if you like, the political, financial, sociological technology to harness those resources, then this could become a very, very favored province. Rather than the Cinderella, it would be the Cinderella with the shoes on.
Silver slippers.
Yeah.
Gold slippers.
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
very
Thank you. So we will ask you to indulge us just a few more minutes. The Dino students will make some closing remarks, and then I'll tell you the next steps. And don't worry, I'll monitor. She will not be allowed to continue too long.
Thank you very much, Program Director. My role here this afternoon is not so much closing remarks, but I do have a very humbling, I'm actually humble to stand here this evening because it's a privilege, and I'm going to own my privilege to say thank you. Thank you for coming to Sol Plaatje University, I love how you describe it, connecting with us this afternoon. It's very seldom that we've got moments to connect, and I think this indeed is one of those that I, for one, will cherish, and I believe all those in attendance, both virtually and physically present this afternoon, will cherish forever. Thank you. I'm also filled with gratitude for the amazing lecture this afternoon. I'm also encouraged, and I think all of us are, to hear that you're working on making our city more vibrant through color, through art, and also just through storytelling, because it's through stories that we're able to ensure that those who come after us understand the legacy, but also what they need to do going forward. Thank you for what you've done for our country. Thank you for what you continue to do. And lastly, just thank you for being you. I have to say, you're just you. And I think that's important for us to take home because it's a reminder for us all to just try to be us. But in that, remembering to always put on a more human face. To our Chancellor, Judge Stephen Majid, Justice Majid, I love the way Justice Sachs describes you. Thank you for being the light. Without you, this lecture would not be. Without you, in fact, your role, a degree, would not be. And just thank you always for being our compass when at times we get focused and bogged down in the administration of running an institution. As a Chancellor, you remind us of the core values and principles, and for that, I say thank you. Professor Crouch, thank you, our VC, our CEO. Professor Meyer, your role this afternoon is also that of Program Director, which you have held formidably, and I'm not going to spend too much time because I don't want to get kicked off. So I'm going to go straight ahead into what I was scripted to do. So to all our special guests, those invited by the Chancellor and Vice-Chancellor who have accepted the invitation, thank you. To all our guests in attendance, thank you once again. A special thank you to Ms. Basomi Oliphant for coordinating this lecture. It has ran seamlessly. To all the staff from the Department of Institutional Advancement, Facilities and Services, OHSE, AV, Campus Security, and all others that I may have not mentioned, thank you. To all those once again online who are watching, and I do have evidence, we have been receiving pictures of you. You all look lovely online. Thank you. And once again, just thank you to the audience for your robust engagement, as well as to the students. Thank you for your contribution too.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we were supposed to end at 6:15. You can take a look at the time, and you can give yourself a round of applause. No one showed impatience.
Yes.
Everyone allowed us to complete our program. And I think that speaks to our gratitude, Justice Sachs. Not only have you given us food for thought, you've explained a part of the Constitution that we don't think about, the process in making it. And we want to say thank you to everyone who didn't give up, who went through the process, so we have a Constitution that works for us. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to reveal my age, but I'm going to say if a 90-year-old can have the energy of Justice Sachs, all of us have reason to look at how we are living. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for your indulgence. We invite you now for some refreshments in the foyer. And we now will ask our Justice Majid to hand over some gifts from us.
It's from the university, Justice Sachs.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, my brother. Thank you.
I can't see it from here, but I'm assured there are refreshments. So you're welcome to it. Thank you very much.